Welcome to the in-between,
where shift happens,
the moment between where we are
and where we are going.
We will ask all the questions,
maybe find some answers,
and generally work at being okay.
In the mystery of the in-between.
And in this episode 4 today, we are talking about intent versus impact. I mean, this has been I don't know. I've been on this kind of train for a bit, this idea of intent versus impact.
Does seem to keep coming up, doesn't it?
I don't know. And I have to check my own stuff too. But before we get into that, if you're just joining us, welcome to the in-between where shift happens. And today we're talking about intent versus impact. And so the whole stick of this podcast is that we agree on a topic, mostly. And then one comes with questions to kind of guide our conversation. And the fun part is Dan has no idea what the questions are. Even more fun today is I don't have any idea what the questions are. So we are like in it to win it today. And we're going to see where this topic
We'll see what the impact is.
Yes. It may be different than the intent.
Yeah.
So what kind of spurred this today for me to talk about is, I don't know, in the world of memes, I think we often now, for some reason, communicate through memes. And we think that this, I don't know, whether for good or for bad or for in between. And recently there was this meme that kind of was like parallel humor to a real lived experience of a group of individuals, kind of like mirroring sort of the topic or the issue. And people laughed and people shared it. A lot of people within spiritual communities and ministers that I know laughed and shared this until someone said, hey, wait a minute. This actually is a real issue that real people have to navigate. And by making light or making fun of this in some sort of way, it really invalidates that experience. And so, and a lot of people were like, check themselves. They're like, oh, didn't even think about that. Thank you for bringing it up. And then some people were kind of doubled down of, people, they just don't need to take things so personal, and we can laugh about things and blah, blah, blah. And some people are just looking to be offended. It went the gamut.
Yeah.
And I just kind of watched this scenario take place with varying levels of feeling, but it did. And right. I mean, and I think that's just a really exaggerated example of this, but I think this idea that we say things, we do things, makes sense to us, funny to us, whatever to us, but then actually, how does that land?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the context of the conversation. So I guess my question, just to start us off, I would love to see your perspective of kind of the scenario I just described, or just your perspective of how this intent versus impact.
Yeah. Yikes.
And then we'll get into the importance and what our next steps are. But let's just how does it show up? I mean, I've given one example.
I think that this is such a widespread issue that there's so much to say, but you mentioned that maybe this is an exaggerated example, but unfortunately I don't think it is. I mean, in no way is that example exaggerated. That's literally what happened.
Right.
Also, I guess
it shows up sometimes in subtler ways, I guess is what I meant.
Yeah. Sure. Sorry. Yes. But I think the realism about that example, that is literally how it shows up, that somebody can say, hey, I would just like to bring to your attention XYZ. And we have some people who are like, oh, I had no idea. Wow. Other people who are like, oh, interesting. I might think about that. And then others who are like, screw you.
Whoa, you're just being too sensitive.
Yeah. Don't tell me what your experience is, because it's inconvenient to me, whoa, really?
Right. Even though the words aren't that's how it lands, right?
Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think it is fascinating to me to look back at, I don't know, this is going to sound weird, but Stranger Things comes to mind. the show Stranger
Oh,
Things,
oh,
right?
yeah.
And I think because it's such an apt example of like the 80s, like this is literally what life was like, and literally like the way that white suburban America thought in those times where I grew up
Mhm.
feels so different than my life now. Like the thinking, the collective thinking was so different, and it's really hard to look at that and go, how do we not get it? And then at the same time, there are other times where I'm like, wow, that's the experience I had. I didn't have this other experience or this other experience or this other experience. So I try and observe, I try and learn, I try and look and listen and whatever, and I still will never walk those shoes. Like that's not my experience. And so when we look at, like, I think memes are a really good example of what we're talking about here, because when somebody creates a meme, like I've created a meme where I think it's really clear what this means, and then you get somebody who comments on it and clearly it meant something completely different to them. Even if
Right.
they thought even if it wasn't misunderstood or offensive or what, like they also thought it was funny, but for a totally different reason.
Right.
And it's like, oh wow, interesting. Like my intention was I meant this by it because it's a reference to this whatever, you know, culture reference kind of thing. And somebody else just took it at face value for it being funny. And it's like, oh, that's okay. I guess that's also funny. That's not at all what I meant, but maybe also funny. Um,
And
but
not wrong, right? It's like
right.
not
Yeah.
wrong, right?
Not,
It's
yeah.
like, oh, wow. I think it's like I think that that example that you just described is like where we really like in our face realize, oh wait, my experience isn't the only one.
Yeah. Right. Right. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And so I think it's like on one hand, so I have like these two like split perspectives. One is how are we so like collectively it can feel like, I don't know if this is totally true. How are we still so ignorant to the experience of others?
I don't know that we're ignorant. I think sometimes we just don't care. Right.
Well, right. That's what I'm saying is like
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
have this feeling at times like how can this be so true? And then I also have this other feeling at times of like, well, I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah, I guess that's
So
true.
can I
That's
be
true.
compassionate to, and is it, I don't know, like it's not, yes, I can be compassionate and it's not my place to be responsible for other people not knowing things, I
Yeah.
guess. So it's
Well,
all,
and I
it is challenging. It is challenging.
well, and I think too, I have to remind myself when I kind of get my hackles up about, come on now, folks. Remember, words matter.
Yeah.
Um, impact matters. Like, think about it, right? And I
Yeah.
don't think that doesn't mean that we have to like spend our whole lives like analyzing every single word because we're gonna like make mistakes. We're gonna like our impact is gonna be so far off from our intent. Like that's impossible. We're
Yeah.
never gonna avoid that. I don't know the goal is to avoid it, but I think the goal is to be open when we realize it and then make shifts and changes.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, I have to lean in when I get really frustrated in this topic. I have to lean into empathy too, because I don't know about you, but life's hard. And it's not just hard for me, it's hard for everyone.
Yeah.
And everyone's doing the best they can. Sometimes the best is not good enough, or sometimes the best is terrible, right? But I
Yeah.
think everyone is doing the best they can. And so I don't have to, but I'm trying to choose more oftentimes than not um, to lean in with that people are just trying to stay above water.
Yeah.
Um, and I think goes back to that thing that we talk about a lot, that responsibility to people, not
Yeah.
for them. We do I think impact is this awareness of our responsibility to people. So that like when we're creating memes, when we're doing a talk from in front of a group of people, even when we're doing a podcast, right? To constantly remember, okay, this is my viewpoint. And how can I be open to other perspectives, or how can, to the best of my ability, allow my words to land softly
Yeah.
and not to make people's lives worse, or it's like
Yeah.
it has to be that that hum in below things, I think.
Yeah. And I think it's for a lot of us like a new concept to see people like publicly taking responsibility for their
Mm.
actions,
Yeah.
let alone privately, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so I don't know that we're culturally great or even good at at expecting responsibility to be taken
Yeah.
in an honest and authentic way. And I don't know that we're good collectively yet at asking people to take responsibility,
Mm.
right? Like I find it's way easier to, scream from the rooftops for people to take responsibility than it is to actually go to those people and compassionately, kindly have a conversation where
Yeah.
responsibility can be taken. And then for them to then also be in a place where they're willing then to take responsibility for what they did or said. I think it even like it feels super like it's like far out there for that
Yeah.
to like a
Yeah.
lot of things have to happen in order for that to go well, and I think what we're used to is the reactionary response of like doubling down or
Yeah.
getting your hackles up or whatever in those kind of situations. And it's like, what would it be like if that's not like, how else can we do that? I guess is what comes up for me. Like, what does it look like if that's not the way? If we don't respond that way, if we get good at like the responsibility to each other
Yeah.
thing, what does that look like?
Well, and I think it requires a willingness to see beyond ourselves. And I think that, and it's hard, right? Or even willingness to see beyond our group of folks, right? Like that, to be able to like, um, because when we post things like that, we're posting it to the people like in our group, right? That know that are going to say, "Oh, that's funny, that's whatever, whatever," but like beginning to think, "Oh, wait, there are other folks that this may land differently," right?
Yeah.
Or, and I think it's also, even though we're talking about intent, not invent, intent versus impact, I think that they go hand in hand, because we also have to look at our intentions behind things,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Am I saying this thing because I want attention? If I am I saying this thing because I feel some sort of need that's not being met, that I think that will be met if I say this thing this way and get this response,
Yeah.
right? So I think it is a call to get in the habit of checking our intentions. And once again, that can be exhausting, like every single word I say, I have to check my intention. No, not necessarily. But I think the more that we know about ourselves, the more honest we are with ourselves, the more authentic we are with our challenges, the things that scare us, the things that we would love to lean into. I think that we can become just more kind of adept at this self reflection,
Yeah.
and then begin to create an inside that we want to be reflected on the outside, right? When the inside and the outside are congruent.
Yeah.
Which I think is like, isn't that the life practice? I think for me, it seems like, and especially in the context of like spirituality and spiritual community, isn't that the practice where we can begin to have the inside and the outside match and it be okay? And I think those conversations take authenticity, they take vulnerability, they take creating a big space for people to land and make mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
When I think that's such a, I know we always use the word interesting. It's such an
Interesting.
interesting perspective.
Very interesting.
Um, but it's like life evolves, which means it keeps changing.
Mhm. Never static.
Yeah, and I had always heard, oh, change is hard. Change is hard. And I think I don't know, change can certainly bring up a lot of things, but I don't know, like I think that we've talked about this before. The speed of change, the rate of change has increased, and so I think people who were born 80 years ago, the rate of change was not very fast compared to what it is now.
Yeah.
And so I think if life seemed like it was one way for 40, 50, 60 years, and then all of a sudden it seems like it's different all the time, I can get how disorienting that is. And that doesn't change the fact that is we are where we are, and life is in fact changing faster than it's ever changed before. And I think for a lot of people, like, you'd mentioned self-reflection. I think self-reflection can be a new idea for a lot of people still.
Yeah.
I'll say still because I think it's like that concept is not new, right? That concept has been around for eternity, and yet it's not necessarily common practice yet here in the States. And so then we introduce, like, so you have these spiritual movements that introduce the idea of intention. Set your intentions. What are your intentions? Intention setting, envisioning, and all this stuff. And so then that seems like the new evolutionary cutting edge thing. And then here we are, and other people and, groups like us and whatever are like, yeah, and intent, right? And like in, 5 years from now, there's going to be also this other thing that beyond intent, there is whatever. And it's
Right.
like, so it does, I do recognize that too keeps changing. Like we do, if we're not, I'll say, quote, keeping up, like it does keep evolving. We do keep uncovering new ideas that are new to us. They're not new ideas, right?
Yeah.
Like things that are new to me. I keep finding out new things for me because I have that interest and I have set that intention to keep, kind of following that self-reflective path and looking at how my life impacts the life of others, the lives of others around me, and looking outward and inward simultaneously. Like I don't think it can be just one direction.
Right.
And I guess the point is, like, I think that is still a really new idea. Like there are multiple steps in this idea that is really new for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right. Like I think that's what we're seeing is like we're seeing the people who lived one way for decades, some of whom are wanting to look for ideas that are new to them, and others are wanting to double down and say, no, this is the way life has always been. Stop trying to change it for me. Stop trying to change it. This is the way our life has always been. And then now we're seeing others who were born into change, born into this rate of change that's like super fast,
Yeah.
just like clicking along, So I think we're seeing all of that like rub up against each other, and it's like I can, when I stop and pause and kind of break it down like that for myself, I can really see how challenging that might be,
Yeah.
or how challenging it is. I mean, it can be challenging for me too, right? But how challenging that can be for so many people. So yeah, I mean, I think there is this like, I don't know, this whole looking at intent thing. I think can feel like, asking people to take responsibility who have never been asked to take responsibility before. I think can often feel like a calling out.
Oh yeah.
Well, and I think too, I mean, you're talking about the rate of change and like how we see it in the world, and also we are connected in ways that we've never been before, like historically, like long time before. Right?
Yeah.
And so this idea that, 200 years ago, this idea that this experience I'm having, oh, someone else over here also has that experience. Wow, we're connected in this experience.
Yeah.
We see it in real time, right? We see joy, triumph, suffering, atrocity, like all the things we see like instantaneously, to realize like, wow, the human experience, we're all having these experiences. They look different, right? And so I think that the conversation around impact really is beginning to evolve from this greater understanding of our interconnectedness. And we see it just in because we can see people's lives like in real time, right?
Yeah.
We don't have to wait on a letter, you know, that takes 3 months to get to us, right? I mean, like
Right.
we see it in real time and just this instant sort of connection. And you would think that that would, and I think it is, but I think for me, you think that you would the rate of understanding of that would be exponential
Yeah.
to the rate of, because we're like, wow, we're seeing it like in real time. And I think that we have to begin to understand and lean into and continue to grow in this idea that I am connected to you. I am connected to you, like Dan. I'm connected to anyone who's hearing this, and like my decisions directly impact
Yeah.
everyone
Yeah.
around me, and they directly impact people I will never see. They directly impact the earth on which we live, like all the things. Like we're not floating around in a bubble and not touching anything.
Right.
And so I think the more that we can like become aware of that, just from like this like 35,000-foot level, become aware of that, then that can begin to inform the words we say, the memes we post,
Yeah.
like how we interact with one another, how we care for one another, how we support one another, how we vote, how we view people who have different perspectives than our own, view people who have different like polar opposite seemingly perspectives than our own, right? So I think like that's the thing, like that's the, can we exponentially like increase the awareness of that? And I think it's coming, because I think we're seeing it more and more as we see more and more challenging things in our lives and more division. I think there is this call to like lean into perspective. And I think that that's where this conversation, intent versus impact, is important, because we don't get to scale through life making no impact. It
Yeah.
just is not going to happen.
Yeah.
And we don't get to be like just skid right on through and just like, it's funny for me and to hell with everyone else. We don't get to live that way,
Yeah.
because that's not the truth of the way the universe works, right? That reciprocity,
Yeah.
that reciprocal nature of things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we, like, as humans, have for a very long time lived as if that were true.
Yes.
Like, I don't even think that that's, I was going to say, well, in the United States, like, that's been the thing. But I mean, really, I think to a large degree, that's kind of been the modality throughout history, is like, the in group, whatever that has been,
Whoever the
we
we
are the right ones, and this is the way. And yeah, I mean, have gone around murdering and killing and whatever, doing whatever, because our way is the way. It's the right way. It's the only way, and everything else. Even though within that recognition, we must recognize there are other ways. We've also ignored the fact that there are other ways, right? Like, it's I don't know. It's fascinating to like. Well, I don't know. I guess it's one thing to look back at it throughout history. It's another thing to look at it happening live, and it's like, oh, all right.
Well, and the reality is like the impact when we talk about, I guess I would say like challenging or negative impact. If we look at the people that are the result of said impact, oftentimes they're marginalized, oppressed folks, right? And so like there becomes this, I don't know, this subconscious support of that, because that's what happens, right? That impact keeps folks in their place, right?
Right.
I'm not saying we consciously think this, but I think that the reality, the impact is that's what happens, right? It keeps this sort of weird hierarchy.
Yeah. There has to be a benefit. There is some
Otherwise we wouldn't do
unconscious
it,
or
right?
conscious, a benefit to continuing that message.
Yeah.
Which
And
is
this whole idea of like, I don't know, whenever someone says, someone's just being too sensitive. Is there such thing? I don't know. I don't, in this conversation of impact over intent. Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes you can drive yourself crazy of like if this is not like people pleasing, right? It's just really being aware of the impact of our actions and our words.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and
And
even like, let's say that it is possible for someone to be too sensitive, just for like shits and giggles for the moment. Let's say it is. Why do you care? Like, what does it really matter if that person is in fact too sensitive?
yeah,
Like
apparently it is impacting them negatively. So why not have compassion and empathy for that?
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. If you're going to care, let's care about, wow, what is happening in your life that I think you are being too like, wow, what brought us to this place?
Yeah.
Because again,
Yeah.
that person is not living in a bubble,
Right.
and I'm not actually separate from them. Like, wow, what's going on? What can we do differently? How can we help?
Yeah, because everyone has a story, right? Like you
Yeah.
have a story, I have a story that influences how I'm showing up in this moment.
Yep.
Like everything that has led up in our lives to this very moment, right?
Now,
And so
unless we mean by everyone's being too sensitive, we really mean I can't get away with saying the things that I've always been able to say, which is,
which
I suspect, is more often the case than people are actually being, quote,
yes.
too
Well,
sensitive.
and I think the response of that sort of response is like, "Ooh, something's been pricked in me," and I don't really wanna, ask the question of what that is
Yeah.
or have to look at that.
Yeah.
And I've done that. Lord, I
Sure.
still do it. I have said probably in last week, "Well, that wasn't what I meant." Like, how often have we said that?
Right. Yep.
And I think that we can say that like, "Oh, wow, that wasn't my intent, but now I see the impact of my words,"
Yeah.
and then have a conversation about that, right? And so then both people feel validated in their experience, right? I feel validated in, wow, I really didn't want to cause harm. And the other person feels validated of, wow, I feel seen because you've recognized the harm that's caused, right? And
Yeah.
so like it's simple and like how like restorative and how reparative and how like connective that those sorts of conversations can be. Like what man, imagine if like that's our thing that we really began to focus on.
Yeah.
Is like my ego not like being pricked or me whatever, or me feeling like I've been made wrong or whatever, but like, oh wow, there's no wrong. There's like a
Yeah.
greater and greater awareness of something.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And yeah, man, that's hard. That's challenging. That's hard. And when I think about it, I'm like, oh, that's exhausting.
Yeah.
But I think that's what's necessary for us to really have
Yeah.
that connection, that interconnectedness, that interbeing that we speak of. To really understand that fully, I think we have to step into that space.
Yeah. Yeah. I had I guess a mentor years ago who's always stressed the idea that, everybody's just trying to be right.
And Lord
And
knows I am.
if we could step away, if we could step out of right and wrong,
Mhm.
it sounds kind of silly, but it was this idea that like, I don't have to be wrong for you to be right.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, oh, I don't know. I don't know that I still don't think it's totally sunk in yet for me, but I like it, like I do. There are times where I'm like, man, yeah, really, everything is like all this just boils down to
Yeah.
everybody's trying to be right. If we could just step out of right and wrong, like you can be right and I can also be right in two completely different ways that have nothing to do
Yeah.
with each other. And if I can step into the idea that that doesn't matter,
Yeah.
I can let both of us be right and both of us be heard. Because I think that's also like needing to be right also comes down to like wanting to be heard, wanting to
Right.
be seen, understood.
Well, I think that's the underneath. As I was getting ready to say, like, this need to be right. What's underneath that? And obviously, like
Right.
wanting to be seen, wanting to be heard, wanting to be worthy, accepted, to belong, like all those
Yeah.
needs that for whatever reason in our lives are not being met in a way that supports our self-actualization, right? And so there's lots of different ways. I mean, there's life experiences, there's traumas, there's all sorts of things that I think create that maybe distrust in ourselves of
Yeah.
like, am I good enough? Am I worthy? Am I right? And so then we then overcompensate When I say we, I mean me, but I think I'm not the only one. Overcompensate in ways that often it shows up in having to be right, having to have the last word, having to know it all, having to like blah 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 blah. Fill in the
Something to
blank.
prove.
Yeah, and so, and I think we're all in process of like uncovering that.
Yeah.
And I think it's a lifetime. I really
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
But I think each day is a step in that uncovering.
Yeah.
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 And so that's why I think this conversation is so important. I mean, clearly we can't like fully grasp the totality of its impact.
Right.
But maybe the impact of this little conversation is even me having it and people even hearing it is like, oh, like that one moment where someone just thinks one second longer than they usually do about the impact of their words or the impact of their actions.
Yep.
I think for me, then this conversation is worth it and it's been supportive.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I don't know about you, but I mean, I know we usually close this with like a final takeaway, but I'm going to diverge from that and like create our collective takeaway.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it's exactly what you said. This mentality, it's so simple. It's like, you don't have to be wrong for me to be right.
Yeah.
Right. It's like that mentality. And like, how can we take that, just the simplicity of that and lean into the experiences of others? I think that is, for me, the takeaway. If you want to give your takeaway, all right. I feel bad not allowing you to have a takeaway. So I'll give you one takeaway. One.
No, I mean, I think that's probably it. If it were anything else, it would be like, I'm just tired. Can we not? Like, there is a certain level, like, yeah, you said before, like, this feels exhausting. And I think there is a certain level of when we are tired, it gets even harder.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know that I necessarily have an answer for that, but I think just realizing, like, yes, we are doing the work. Like, it is getting better, I guess is the word. I don't know. We are changing and shifting collectively.
Yeah.
I think we're just tired. We're all burnt out because of the amount of work that's happening. We're on this like steady incline of change, trying to catch up with this exponential change. And so we're leaping and jumping to catch that exponential change. So it does feel tiring. That doesn't mean we're not progressing.
Yeah. But I think we're doing the work and then we are the work.
Yeah.
And I think that both individually and collectively.
Yeah.
And just recognizing that. And I think we can have a grace for ourselves and for each other in the process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I love this conversation. We could talk forever, but we won't do that. We'll save it for next time.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us in this conversation, understanding that our interconnectedness and our impact, not only to those around us, but everywhere we go, we touch. And we are both the changers and the changed. And so until next time, we will meet you here in the in-between, and we hope a lot of shift happens. Nobody really enjoys being in the in-between.
But thanks for being here anyway.
We may not have found all the answers,
but certainly some. And maybe more importantly,
a little shift has happened.
And the beauty of it all is that we are not alone in the in-between.
So until next time, we hope a lot of shift happens.